In a house veiled by mourning, an infant's cry slices the night. A poor maid crosses a forbidden threshold. A duke, forged by duty, opens a door and discovers a secret that could save his heir and ruin them both. One heartbeat, two destinies, an impossible choice. Silence or truth, loyalty or desire. As the Crystal Palace rises, so does scandal. A past buried beneath a willow stirs, reaching for the present with trembling hands. What happens when mercy shatters the laws of nobility? Before we begin, share where you're listening from and tell me what enchants you most about period romances, the whispered glances, the clash of classes, or love that refuses to bow. London, in the year of our Lord 1851. The city stirred with the marvels of the Great Exhibition, yet behind the tall iron gates of Harrow House, no trace of celebration could be found. Grief clung to its ancient stone walls like a second skin, heavy and unrelenting. The household had fallen into hushes and half-closed doors since the passing of the young Duchess in childbirth. And though time moved forward in Hyde Park, at Harrow House, it stood painfully still. Willow stepped through the servants' entrance just after sunrise, her breath visible in the cold air of early spring. She clutched her meager satchel to her chest, her boots scuffed but clean, her grey wool dress pressed as best as her hands could manage. A crisp white apron was tied neatly around her waist, and her dark chestnut hair was twisted tightly beneath a linen cap. She had arrived on foot, alone, hired hastily through a family contact to replace a scullery maid dismissed after a kitchen accident. No one had bothered to learn more about her, no one cared to ask. The servants' hall was hushed. Even the clatter of pots seemed muffled beneath the weight of mourning. Whispers followed her, glances cut from shadows. The upper staff offered neither welcome nor warning, only the silence of a house in sorrow. It was not until she reached the nursery floor that she heard it, the sharp, unrelenting cry of a baby whose grief had no words. Lord Henry, heir to the Harrow name and only child of the Duke, had been born frail and grieving. The nurses said he cried because he missed his mother. Others whispered he cried because he could sense the cold in his father's heart. Willow, who had once buried her own child without a name, believed neither. Assigned to dust shelves and scrub floors, she moved softly, respectfully, barely drawing breath near the nursery. But that cry, piercing, cracked, ceaseless, called to something deep inside her, something buried beneath layers of duty and silence. It was just past Vespers when she found herself outside the nursery once more. The corridor was empty, the gaslights dimmed for the evening. The nursemaid's voice carried through the wooden door, sharp and indifferent. "He'll cry himself, tired. Let him." Willow's hands trembled at the handle. She should walk away. She had no right. But no one came, no one soothed, and the child's cries were no longer those of protest, they were desperate. She pushed the door open. Inside, the room was cast in soft lamplight. Toys of ivory and silver lined the walls, untouched. Lace-draped windows let in the faint scent of rain. In the ornate cradle, Lord Henry twisted in his swaddling, his face flushed red with effort, tears streaking down cheeks far too small for such sorrow. The nurse was gone. The hearth was cold. Willow approached as if drawn by a thread spun from something older than rules, something older than shame. She lifted the child, his little fists flailing, his sobs hiccuping in exhaustion. Instinct overtook propriety. Her heart pounded not with fear, but with memory. She sat in the rocker by the fireless grate and cradled him gently against her chest. Her body, miraculously, still answered the call. Warmth met hunger, flesh met need, and silence, blessed and whole, fell like snow. She did not hear the door open. She only felt it, that sudden shift in the air, the presence entering like a gust of wind through velvet. She raised her head slowly, her breath caught mid-thought. There in the doorway stood the Duke of Harrow, tall, severe, cloaked in the darkness of his black frock coat, his eyes, those unreadable eyes of winter sea grey, fixed on the child, then on her. He did not speak, nor did he rage. The moment held. She did not rise. She could not. He did not demand, he did not accuse. His gaze lingered on the infant's sleeping face, now nestled peacefully against the bodice of a maid's dress. Then his eyes returned to hers, hazel and unflinching, bright with something more dangerous than fear, understanding. For a breath, maybe two, silence reigned. And then, in the hush that followed, Willow understood. She had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, not with her hands, nor with her body, but with her heart. He turned without a word. She remained, pulse trembling beneath her skin, holding the child she had not birthed, in a room where everything now hung suspended between ruin and redemption. Dawn crept slowly across the London skyline, bathing Harrow House in a thin veil of pearl-coloured mist. The sun, pale as porcelain, filtered through the fog and cast elongated shadows across the gravel path that curved like a question mark toward the front entrance. It was the kind of morning that made even the iron fences seem to sigh, and within the nursery wing of the estate, silence held its breath. Willow stood at the window, her fingers curled around the sheer muslin drape as she watched the awakening garden below. The child, Lord Henry, slept soundly in his cradle, his chest rising and falling with soft, rhythmic ease. His tiny fingers curled into fists atop the lace blanket, and a faint murmur escaped his lips. Not a cry, not even a whimper, but the ghost of one. He had not cried once since the night before. That fact alone unsettled Willow far more than his relentless wailing ever had. Relief mingled with dread. Her body ached, her mind reeled. She had acted without permission, without precedent, and the man who had witnessed it, the Duke himself, had neither spoken nor condemned her. What did it mean? She glanced over her shoulder at the cradle once more, then returned to her task. She moved through the nursery like a ghost in broad daylight, straightening the folded linen, tucking away the unused bottle, smoothing the wrinkles in the nursery chair's fabric. Her touch was gentle but brisk, like someone trying not to linger where she did not belong. Below, the house stirred. Carriages rumbled against the cobblestones, and voices in clipped tones filtered in from the east corridor. A new guest was expected today, and with her arrival came a different kind of anticipation, the kind that swept through noble halls like perfume through a ballroom. Lady Eugenia Greystoke. Her name carried elegance like a fan in a silk-gloved hand, delicate, graceful, and sharp when needed. It had long been whispered that she and the Duke had been loosely matched before the Duchess's untimely passing, and now, a year later, the Dowager had extended a formal invitation for her to stay. Temporarily, of course. Officially, she came to lend her name and charm to the charitable endeavors surrounding the great exhibition. Unofficially, her presence was a proposition. In the servants' hall, there were murmurs. "Did you hear? She's bringing 3 trunks and a hatbox for each day. They say her gloves are stitched in Paris, and her corsets shipped from Vienna." The Dowager's watching her closely, and she always knows what she wants. Willow heard them, as one always hears what isn't meant to be heard. She folded cloths in the linen room, peeled potatoes in the kitchen, polished brass rails by the grand stair, and through it all, the name Eugenia fluttered around her like a gilded insect. Still, no one had spoken a word about what had occurred in the nursery. Until that evening, the day passed like a procession of carefully measured footsteps. Willow performed her duties, said her yes, ma'am, and right away, sir, with precision, and returned to the nursery as the house dimmed and the lamplighters passed by the windows. Lord Henry stirred when she entered, and at the sight of her, his small mouth opened in recognition. She lifted him slowly, her arms steady, her heart not. The moment her warmth met his skin, he calmed. It was in that stillness that the door creaked open. Willow froze, but it was not the Duke, it was his mother. The Dowager Duchess Eleanor Harrow, cloaked in widow's black with a veil of shadow behind her, stood silently at the threshold. Her eyes, dark as obsidian, took in every detail. The fire in the grate, the orderly shelves, the clean linens, and the child cradled in the arms of a maid. Willow's lips parted, but no sound emerged. The Dowager did not speak. She stepped into the room with the grace of someone used to ruling not through volume, but through presence. Her gaze settled on the child, now fast asleep, head resting against Willow's shoulder. She observed, not with warmth nor disdain, but with the still precision of a hawk over open ground. "You calm him," she said at last, her voice low and clipped like the ticking of a clock. Willow nodded, afraid to say more. The dowager's gaze sharpened. "And do you intend to continue calming him?" Willow's breath caught. "Only if his grace commands it." The silence that followed felt like an hour pressed into a second. Then, without further word, the dowager turned and left. Moments later, a message was sent. The Duke wished to see her. Willow descended the rear staircase, her hands trembling beneath her apron. When she entered the drawing room, the air felt heavy with unsaid things. Alistair Harrow stood near the fireplace, his posture erect, one hand on the marble mantelpiece, the other resting beside a glass of untouched brandy. He did not look at her at first. "Lord Henry did not wake last night," he said flatly. Willow remained near the door. "No, Your Grace." His jaw clenched. "The physician is baffled. He said the child's breathing has improved. Color has returned to his cheeks." She dared a glance at him. "I only did what I thought best." He was in distress. Finally, he turned to face her, their eyes locked, his storm-colored and searching, hers wide with equal parts fear and quiet resolve. The firelight danced across his features, catching in the shadows beneath his cheekbones, outlining the firm line of his mouth. "There are rules," he said slowly. "Rules that keep this house from collapsing under the weight of scandal. Rules that prevent chaos, that define boundaries." "I know them," she answered softly, "and I broke one." He took a breath, but it was not the breath of fury. It was something heavier, more difficult. "I should dismiss you," he said. Willow nodded. "But I won't." She blinked, startled. He stepped closer, not touching, never touching, but close enough that she could feel the heat of the fire radiating off his coat, close enough to hear the restraint in his voice. "You will remain here," he continued. "You will act as the child's night nurse, discreetly. No one will question it. If anyone does, they will answer to me." Willow lowered her gaze. "And the day nurse?" He looked away, his jaw tightening. "She has been dismissed." A long pause settled between them, layered with things that could not be spoken. He moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. "You calmed him," he repeated, softer this time. Willow nodded again, her voice barely a breath. "He calms me too." When she returned to the nursery, the fire had burned lower, but the warmth remained. She laid Henry down and watched him sleep. Outside, in the grand wing prepared for Lady Eugenia, servants bustled. Footmen adjusted floral arrangements. A dressmaker's assistant measured hangings for a traveling wardrobe. The dowager sat in her private parlor and watched the preparations unfold, not with pride, but with calculation. She had seen something in that nursery, a flicker of something not easily named, not impropriety, not ambition, something older than both. That night, the bells did not ring. The child did not cry. But beneath the roof of Harrow House, 3 hearts beat uneasily in the dark. One just learning the rhythm of life, one rediscovering it, and one learning that love is not always loud. Sometimes it enters the world on bare feet, quiet, trembling, uninvited, and yet impossible to dismiss. Rain had fallen steadily throughout the day, brushing against the windows of Harrow House like 1,000 sighs that would not be silenced. By evening, the grounds were cloaked in mist, and the sky above London wept softly over the streets, the rooftops, the lives. Inside the nursery, however, a small fire crackled with gentle resolve. Shadows danced upon the walls, shadows of a rocking chair, a cradle, and the curved silhouette of a young woman holding a sleeping child against her chest. Willow read softly from a faded chapbook she had once carried in her apron for years, its corners curled with memory. Her voice, warm and even, traced the story's words like the edge of a dream. Though Lord Henry was far too young to understand, his small fingers curled around the hem of her sleeve as if he never wished her to stop. She paused, lifting her eyes from the page. The light from the fire caught the soft fuzz of blonde hair on his head, the pink at the edge of his cheeks. His breath was steady now, peaceful, a far cry from the gasping, red-faced tremors he had once suffered. He looked at last like a child who believed the world could be kind. She closed the book, pressing it lightly against her heart. But the stillness of the room stirred the thoughts she had spent years trying to lock away. The warmth of the infant against her body, the way his weight nestled into the hollow between shoulder and breast, was too familiar, too haunting. Once, in a winter far colder than this one, she had held another child, a child whose eyes had never opened. The memory came upon her slowly, as if the mist outside the window had slipped into the room and settled over her shoulders. She had been 19. Her name had not been Willow then. It had been Eliza, a name soft as a sigh and full of a mother's hope. She had worked in a smaller house near Kent for a master who rarely spoke and a mistress who spoke too much. She had fallen in love with a boy who tended the horses and smiled only when no one watched. Their love had been foolish, reckless, stolen beneath staircases and behind haystacks. When she had begun to show, they had dragged her by the wrist to the farthest room in the servants' wing. She was not permitted to leave, not even to say goodbye to him. He had vanished, dismissed or fled, she never knew. She gave birth in silence, in pain, alone save for an old washerwoman with cloudy eyes. The child had not cried. The silence that followed had been absolute. She buried the baby at the edge of the woods behind the house, beneath a willow tree. It had been raining that day too. When she left that place, fired, disgraced, nameless, she took the name of the tree with her, Willow. She had wandered for years after, taking what work she could, never staying long enough to be seen, until Harrow House, until this child, until this strange, aching twist of fate. She bent now and placed a soft kiss on Henry's forehead, then laid him gently in his cradle. Her lips trembled, her hands did not. Behind her the nursery door creaked. She turned quickly, but no one entered. It had not opened. It had settled, as old doors often did, as if the house itself had exhaled. Yet Willow felt it, eyes somewhere watching. What the walls remembered they did not speak aloud, but someone would. In the parlour below, the Dowager Duchess Eleanor sat before a fire of her own, her gloved hands folded neatly over the edge of an embroidery hoop she had not touched in hours. A single candle flickered beside her, illuminating the heavy folds of her morning gown and the fine lines etched around her mouth. Her eyes, sharp and shrewd, rested on the steward standing before her. "What do we know of the new night nurse?" she asked without preamble. The steward, Mr. Cray, cleared his throat and adjusted his spectacles. Hired through a reference from a retired cook in Hampshire, no formal education, no family listed, works hard, never late, keeps to herself. No surname? She goes by Willow, Your Grace. Only Willow. The Dowager's lips thinned. That's not a name, that's an attempt to forget one. She dismissed him with a slight nod, and the steward bowed out, leaving the Dowager alone with her thoughts and the pop of the fire. She was not a woman who indulged in sentiment, but she had been a mother, and she knew what grief looked like in the eyes of a servant who pretended to be nothing more than a shadow. Somewhere in the deeper hallways of the estate, another figure prowled. Not elegant like the Dowager, nor haunted like Willow, but sharp, restless and calculating. Edward Harrow, the Duke's cousin, born of the same blood but none of the same bearing, had spent the last fortnight observing the changes within Harrow House with growing agitation. The whispers, the hushes, the new maid who was suddenly treated with the same reverence as the governess, a closed nursery door that was never questioned, a child who once screamed now content to rest. He had asked questions, he always did. And though none of the footmen dared say much, one chambermaid, young and eager to impress, had hinted that the night nurse and the Duke had shared a long silence in the nursery, that the child had stopped crying the same night the maid had begun staying past dusk. Edward did not need facts, he needed motive. He found her near the linen closet, where the hall narrowed into a seldom-used corridor that led to the east wing. The stone was colder there, the sconces fewer. Servants passed quickly through it and rarely paused. She was reaching for folded sheets. He stepped forward from the shadows like a breath held too long. "Miss Willow," he said smoothly. She turned, startled, clutching the sheets to her chest. "Forgive me," he continued, his smile too even. "I seem to find you in the most interesting places." She said nothing, but the way her shoulders squared betrayed that she sensed something beneath his tone. He moved closer, not invading, not quite, but narrowing the space between them. "It's quite admirable, you know," he murmured, "the way you've managed to ingratiate yourself into the household, into more delicate places." Willow's voice was calm but clipped. "I do my duty, sir. Nothing more." "Of course, duty." He tilted his head, eyes gleaming. "But it begins so innocently, doesn't it? A favor here, a kindness there, a cradle, a quiet conversation. And before long, people begin forgetting where one stands and where one belongs." Her jaw tightened. "I serve the child. But you are not of him." His smile thinned. "Be careful, Miss Willow. Servants who climb often find the ground disappears beneath them." She met his gaze with the steady fire of someone who had already lost more than he could imagine. "I have nothing to climb toward," she said quietly, "and nothing to lose." He studied her a moment longer, then stepped back. "But others do," he whispered, "and they won't risk it for you." With that he turned and vanished into the gloom of the hallway, leaving only silence and the faint scent of cologne. Willow stood for a long moment, her breath held in the hollow of her chest. Then, carefully, she folded the linen she had come to collect and walked away, not faster, not slower, but straighter. In the nursery, Henry stirred in his sleep and murmured. The walls, ancient and knowing, listened without comment. They remembered everything. The lanterns burned low along the garden walls, casting a soft amber glow over the gravel paths that led to Harrow House. The estate stood grand and immovable against the evening mist, its windows flickering with candlelight and reflection. Inside, music swelled from the drawing room like a tide, violins and cellos pouring emotion into every gilded corner, every damask curtain, every polished stair. The ball, held in honor of the great exhibition, had drawn lords and ladies from across the city. There were titles whispered in every hallway, fortunes rustling in every silk hem, and ambitions sewn into every glove. Harrow House had not entertained at this scale in more than a year. But tonight, under the guiding hand of the Dowager Duchess, everything sparkled again. Chandeliers aglow, crystal decanters brimming, and mirrors reflecting a nobility eager to reclaim its poise. At the top of the stairs, Lady Eugenia Greystoke descended with elegance honed by generations. Her gown, the palest blush with silver embroidery trailing like frost across the skirts, shimmered beneath the candlelight. Her hair, golden and coiled in precise symmetry, bore jeweled pins shaped like violets. She moved not like a guest, but like a woman being watched by the entire room, which, in truth, she was. Servants lined the walls, heads slightly bowed as she passed. She did not see them. Her eyes sought only one figure, Duke Alistair Harrow. He stood near the hearth, dressed in a dark tailcoat and a waistcoat of midnight blue, the fire behind him casting gold over his collar. When their eyes met, he gave a nod, not affectionate, but courteous. It was enough, for now. Eugenia smiled as she approached, her fan fluttering slightly in one gloved hand. "My lord," she said, "the house looks reborn." "The credit belongs to my mother," Alistair replied, his voice calm and distant. "And to you," she added softly. "It takes courage to open doors again." He did not answer. His gaze drifted, as it often did now, toward the distant wing of the house where no music played and no laughter dared intrude. The nursery. While the great and titled toasted progress and empire, Willow stood in the quiet of a linen hallway, adjusting a fresh bottle for the child. She wore her plain wool dress and apron, her cap pressed firmly against her pinned-back hair. The music from the ballroom reached her only as a faint echo, beautiful but far away, like memories one no longer owns. She turned a corner, arms full, and collided with something soft, perfumed, and shimmering. The bottle fell with a clatter but did not break. Lady Eugenia took one startled step back. Willow froze. Between them hung the thick, stunned air of two worlds colliding. Eugenia's eyes dropped first to the fallen bottle, then to Willow's apron, damp now with a faint spill. Her gaze lifted again, sharp, assessing, and then curious. Willow opened her mouth, but before words could form, a sound came from the half-open door nearby, a child's coo. Lady Eugenia turned. There, beyond the archway, lay the nursery, illuminated by lamplight, peaceful, and within it, the cradle. Lord Henry stirred, half awake, murmuring with the soft sound of a child who knows warmth is near. Eugenia's eyes widened, her hand tightened on her fan. A beat of silence passed. She said nothing, neither insult nor accusation. She merely nodded once, as if cataloguing what she had seen, and swept away with the rustle of silk trailing behind her like a wave of frost. Willow stood motionless. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. The rest of the evening passed without incident, but the air had shifted. Something delicate had cracked. Later that night, after the final carriage had vanished into the fog and the musicians had packed their instruments into velvet cases, Harrow House sighed once more into stillness. Willow remained in the nursery, gently rocking Lord Henry, whose eyelids fluttered in peaceful rhythm. Her eyes, rimmed with exhaustion, stayed fixed on the child's face. She did not hear him enter. She only felt him. Duke Alistair Harrow crossed the threshold quietly, his coat removed, his shirt sleeves rolled at the wrists, the collar slightly undone, as if formality had been peeled away at last. He stood in the doorway, watching the woman who had dared soothe what no title or coin could. The fire in the corner cast a flickering halo behind her figure. "You stay even when no one asks you to," he said softly. Willow startled. I was just settling him, Your Grace." "I know." He stepped closer, hands at his sides, his gaze never leaving her. She looked up then, her eyes shadowed but calm. "He stirs less when I remain," she explained. "He dreams deeper." Alistair nodded slowly, taking in the way her voice hushed for the child, the way her hands protected without possessing. "You calm him," he said, echoing the words from a night not far past. Willow lowered her eyes. "That is my purpose." Alistair moved closer still, and now the silence between them crackled, not with formality, but with something heavier, something dangerous. His voice, when it returned, was low, raw. "It isn't only the child." She looked up. "You calm me," he whispered. For a moment, time suspended. The fire cracked in the grate. The wind brushed against the nursery panes. Willow's throat closed around 1,000 thoughts. She saw the wear in his eyes, the hunger that had nothing to do with the flesh and everything to do with rest, with peace, with something he could not name. But she could. She stepped back. "You mustn't say that," she said, her voice firm despite its tremble. "I serve at your mercy, my lord, and mercy ends when desire begins." He looked as though he might speak, but the truth of her words held him still. It was not rejection that stood between them. It was the terrible precision of reality. Willow turned her gaze back to Henry, whose tiny fist now rested against his cheek, his breath warm and even. "I am not part of this world," she added, barely above a breath. "You are," Alistair replied, "more than anyone knows." He left before she could respond, but his absence felt heavier than his presence. Elsewhere in the house, the Dowager Duchess walked the hallways, her fingers trailing lightly along the carved wood of the banister. She did not sleep easily on nights of celebration. Too many faces, too many masks. As she turned toward the back kitchens, she paused at the sound of muffled crying. There, beside the hearth, sat a young kitchen maid, barely 16, her apron damp with tears, her hands red from scouring pots. She sobbed quietly, trying to contain it. Willow knelt beside her, no fanfare, no judgment, just the hush of a hand on a shoulder, the quiet murmur of words meant to soothe. The dowager watched from the shadows, unseen. She remembered then a night more than 30 years past, when she had been the girl sobbing in a scullery, the walls closing in, her future unclear. And she remembered the woman who had come to her then, placing a shawl over her shoulders and saying, "You are more than what they make you believe." The dowager turned and walked away, her eyes moist, not from sentiment, but from memory. In Harrow House, some walls bore portraits, others bore secrets. But tonight they bore something rarer, truth, quiet, undeniable, and dangerous. The wind came in from the east that morning, sharp and cutting like a whispered warning. The sky above Harrow House was a bleached grey, the kind that made everything beneath it appear faded, washed in tones of ash and doubt. Even the ivy that clung to the estate's stone facade seemed brittle, its tendrils stiff against the chill. Inside the grand halls, something colder than weather had begun to settle. Whispers. They moved like smoke through corridors, clung to stairwells, and coiled behind closed doors. A word here, a name there, a glance exchanged between footmen, a halted conversation when a maid passed too near. Servants knew the rhythm of rumour well, and this one pulsed with unusual persistence, the Duke's interest, the maid's influence, the child's sudden health, and beneath it all, a question more dangerous than any answer. What does she truly want? Willow was unaware of the full storm forming beneath her feet, though her heart had grown heavier with each passing hour. Henry had stirred with a faint cough that morning, a tight wheeze hidden behind the usual babble. She had noticed, she always did. Yet when she tried to alert the steward for an herbal poultice, she was told to wait. The physician would be arriving shortly. She had not known he was coming, nor who had summoned him. By mid-morning, Dr. Archibald Price stood beside the cradle. He was a man of sharp lines and blunt instruments, with fingers that smelled faintly of tobacco and pomade. His eyes were the colour of cooled iron and just as warm. He examined the child with a frown, made several disapproving sounds, and then turned abruptly to Willow. "And you have been tending him?" he asked, as if she were an unwashed kitchen rag. "I have," she replied carefully, "by request of his grace." "Request?" he scoffed. "Improvised charity, no doubt." He turned back to the cradle, made a few hasty notes in a ledger, then snapped it shut with unnecessary force. "I'll be direct," he said. "This is highly irregular. The child should be cared for by a certified nursemaid, not some unsanctioned creature of instinct." Willow stood still, refusing to shrink. "I see signs of attachment," he continued. "Behavioral imprinting. Dangerous if interrupted suddenly, but far more dangerous if allowed to continue." Her throat tightened. "I am not harming him." "No," he said dryly, "but neither is laudanum. And yet, overused, it kills." With that, he gathered his coat and left her standing in the nursery, the echo of his condemnation hanging in the air like a noose. By the afternoon, the rumours had bloomed into accusations. She had seduced the Duke, they said. She had bewitched the child. She had performed motherly rites without license or title. She had entered rooms where maids did not go and exchanged glances no maid should dare. A dismissed nursemaid, Marjorie Blythe, sour-faced and bitter, reappeared at the servants' quarters, summoned by a letter and offered coin by a gentleman with a golden pocket watch and a wolf's smile. Edward Harrow. He met her in the stables, beneath the creak of the roof and the sharp smell of hay. "She's clever, that one," he murmured, as he placed a heavy pouch in her palm. "But cleverness is only a virtue when it serves the right side." Marjorie sneered. "She always thought she was above the rest of us, with her eyes like she could see through you." "Then return the favour," he said, "and speak through her." By the time Willow learned of the accusation, it was already circulating beyond the servants' halls. The dowager had heard. Eugenia had heard. Even the steward had looked at her with uncertainty as she passed him in the corridor. Willow stood alone in the small pantry near the nursery, staring at the jar of lavender oil she used for Henry's baths. Her hands, so steady before, now trembled around the glass. Her breath came short. She had survived worse, yes, but never while carrying something so fragile. She returned to the nursery that evening and found Henry listless. His cheeks were pale, his eyelids heavy, his cries faint. Panic, sharp and merciless, pierced through her. She lifted him gently, cradling him against her chest, whispering softly, but his body was limp with exhaustion. She knew this rhythm, the body in protest, the spirit in retreat. She sent for the steward. He did not come. She sent for the physician. He would return in the morning. She sent for the Duke. He was occupied with guests. And so, trembling, she did the one thing she had never dared to do. She asked for the dowager. Eleanor Harrow entered the nursery as she had done once before, silently, wrapped in midnight silks, her eyes sharp beneath the veil of age. She took in the sight before her. Willow seated in the nursery chair, rocking the child slowly, tears falling silently down her cheeks. "He's grown weak," Willow said, not bothering to stand. "He senses the uncertainty." The dowager walked forward. Her hand reached out, and to Willow's surprise, she touched Henry's forehead with the back of her fingers. Then softly she sighed. "Dismiss the physician." Willow blinked. "Your Grace?" "I said," she repeated, her voice a blade sheathed in velvet. "Dismiss him. And any nursemaid with looser morals than sense. I will not see this child torn between pride and fear." Willow opened her mouth to speak, but the dowager was already turning. "You will remain," she said, "and anyone who speaks against it will answer to me." That night, the fire in the nursery burned brighter. Willow sat with Henry pressed to her chest, feeling the steady beat of his small heart against her own. The shadows outside the window faded, for just a moment, into silence. In the drawing room, Lady Eugenia sat beside the piano, her gloved fingers tracing the carved edges of the ivory keys. She had heard the news, the dowager's defense, the whispers that refused to die. She sipped her tea without tasting it. She had not misread the shift in the air. Something was being woven in this house, something fragile and deeply dangerous, and in the center of it stood a maid, no, a woman, who moved without title but carried something far more threatening than scandal. Meaning, and meaning in the hands of the lowborn could undo the careful embroidery of aristocracy itself. She rose from the piano and walked to the window, gazing out into the dark garden where the last lantern flickered. If the dowager had chosen a side, then the game had changed. And Eugenia Greystoke had never lost a game. The great exhibition had opened like a hymn to progress, a glass cathedral rising from the heart of Hyde Park to honor empire, invention, and illusion. The Crystal Palace stood vast and glimmering, its iron skeleton draped in light, as if the heavens themselves had been framed into windows. Inside, men and women from every continent moved beneath the high vaulted ceilings in a breathless procession of wonder. Machinery gleamed, silks shimmered, and ideas floated like perfume in the air. London had never seen such spectacle, and yet, for Willow, none of it glittered. She stood near the entrance, wrapped in a borrowed shawl, her dress plain, her presence intentionally unremarkable. She had come not to marvel, nor to mingle, but because the Duke himself had asked it. Not commanded, asked. It had been a simple note delivered with care. "Bring Henry, just for the morning. There is something I would show you both." She had not expected the invitation to be genuine. She had not expected to be seen. But she was. Alistair met her at the Eastern Pavilion, away from the stream of noble guests and foreign dignitaries, away from the mechanical wonders and colonial curiosities. He had exchanged his usual formality for something quieter. No cravat, just a high-collared waistcoat and gloves tucked beneath his arm. He looked more like a man than a duke, and yet more like a duke than any man. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice low, the noise of the crowd muffled by the soft glass canopy overhead. Willow nodded, shifting the baby in her arms. Henry dozed peacefully, swaddled in a shawl that still carried the scent of lavender. "He's been sleeping better," she said, "since the physician was dismissed." "And you?" Alistair asked. She blinked. "I sleep when I can." He smiled faintly, then gestured for her to follow him through a quieter wing, toward the botanical dome. As they walked, They passed gardens suspended in glass, orchids blooming in defiance of English weather, ferns from distant islands curling upward toward the ceiling's golden light. The world smelled of earth and water and dreams. Alistair stopped before a fountain shaped like an open lily. "I come here when the noise becomes too much," he said. "There's something about plants, how they persist, quietly, without applause." Willow watched him, her eyes soft but unreadable. They grow when no one watches. He turned to her then. His eyes found hers. The distance between them, though proper, hummed with the weight of all that had passed without words. "Willow," he said quietly, "there are moments when I forget how to breathe, until I see you." She lowered her gaze, heart pounding in her chest, like the beat of a bird trapped behind lace. "You shouldn't say such things, Your Grace." "I must," he said, stepping closer. "Not because I want to, but because I no longer know how to live otherwise." She held Henry tighter. "I am not part of your world," she murmured. "You have become the center of mine." The words hung between them like dew, trembling on the edge of a fall. He reached forward, not to touch her, but to brush a lock of hair gently from her cheek. His fingers did not linger, but his eyes did. "I see you," he whispered, "even when you try to disappear, especially then." Willow's throat tightened. The pain of longing mixed with fear, and the ache of recognition pressed against her chest. She had been looked at before, yes, but never seen, never held in someone's gaze as something worth risking. And yet, "This cannot be real," she said, voice trembling. "It already is." He leaned in. She did not move. His lips touched hers, softly, reverently, like a vow without sound. Not a kiss born of conquest or impulse, but of confession, of surrender. And for a moment, one breathless, stolen moment, she let herself believe. Then she pulled away. Henry stirred against her chest and the dream broke. "I cannot be another secret behind another door," she said, eyes shining. "Not for you, not for anyone." He looked stricken, not with shame, but with truth. "I never meant to hide you." "Then don't," she said, her voice low. "But understand this, I've already lived in silence. I will not return to it, not even for love." She turned and walked away, the sound of her boots swallowed by the earth beneath the glass. Far behind them, in another wing of the exhibition, Lady Eugenia Greystoke stood near a long table of diplomatic guests, her hands clasped around a delicate flute of elderflower cordial. Her posture was perfect, her hair unshaken by the wind, but her ears burned with something sharp. From the shadows beyond the columns, she had overheard a nursemaid, young, nervous, careless, speaking with another servant, voice lowered yet eager with scandal. She said he visits the nursery in the night, that he stays too long, that she reads to him and not the child. Eugenia's hand tightened on the glass. The nursemaid's voice dropped further. She said the child's breath only steadies when he's near her, that even the dowager turns away now. They say he may love her. Eugenia's expression did not change, not one muscle, but inside her something icy splintered. Later that afternoon, she stood with the Dowager Duchess near the conservatory. The two women, so different in temperament, shared a silence that held more weight than a dozen conversations. "She's very composed," Eugenia said finally, eyes narrowed. "She has earned her composure," the Dowager replied. "You defend her." "I defend what is true," Eleanor said coolly. Eugenia's fingers fluttered over the edge of her shawl. "You realize the whispers will not harm him. They will fall on her." The Dowager's gaze sharpened. "Then perhaps it is time the world learned to whisper more carefully." Eugenia studied the older woman. "You would risk scandal for a maid." "I would risk it," Eleanor said, voice firm, "for a woman who saved my grandson. For a woman who has given this house more peace in 6 months than it has known in 6 years." Eugenia looked away. In her chest, pride twisted with something unfamiliar. Envy, yes, but something deeper. Recognition. She had played the part of the noblewoman all her life. And now, a woman without title, without pedigree, was being seen, truly seen, by a man who had never looked twice at any of their kind. She did not hate Willow, but she envied her power. And power, unacknowledged, became dangerous. That night, back at Harrow House, Willow sat once more beside Henry's cradle. Her lips still tingled from the kiss, her heart heavy with what had been said, and what could never be spoken again. The nursery was warm. The child sighed in his sleep. But outside the door, beyond the walls of flickering lamplight, the world waited. And it did not wait kindly. The morning broke not with birdsong, but with the rattle of wheels and the scent of smoke. Fog clung to the cobblestones like a secret, coiling through the alleyways of London and pressing against the windows of Harrow House with heavy insistence. The world outside was pale and uncertain, as if something vital had slipped through its seams during the night. In the nursery, the stillness felt wrong. Willow entered before the fire was lit, before the lamps were trimmed, before even the footman stirred. She carried the habit of rising early, of listening for the small sounds a child makes in sleep, the rustle, the sigh, the flutter of breath. But that morning, the silence met her like a blow. The cradle was empty. The blankets were gone. Her heart leapt to her throat. She turned on her heel, the cold stone biting through her boots as she crossed the corridor, then another, her pace gaining speed with each unanswered question. "Where is the child?" she demanded of the maid sweeping the gallery. The girl dropped her broom. "Taken, miss. Said it was by order of the physician, sudden intervention, summoned by Mr. Harrow himself." Willow froze. The name fell like a stone in water. Edward. She did not wait for permission, nor blessing, nor explanation. She rushed down the servants' stairs, out the eastern vestibule, her shawl barely thrown over her shoulders as she stepped into the cold embrace of the London morning. Her breath came fast, a ghost against the air. She knew the carriage. A dark green landau polished to shine, the crest of Harrow obscured beneath a removable brass plate, meant to look discreet, meant to vanish. But she had seen it before. She ran, past butcher carts and sleepy florists, past the baker already opening his shutters, past the gaslights dimming in the new light. Her feet pounded the pavement with desperation, not born of madness, but of clarity. She reached Trafalgar Square as the carriage turned past the lion statues, blending with the morning traffic of merchants and gentlemen on horseback. Her heart hammered in her chest, her lungs burned. "Stop!" she cried, her voice splitting the morning calm. The driver did not hear, or pretended not to. She lunged forward, her hand striking the rear of the carriage. The door opened from within. A pale-faced nurse sat inside, her arms too tight around the child. Lord Henry's face was flushed, his cry muffled beneath a woolen coverlet. Willow reached in, unthinking, unstoppable, and pulled him into her arms. The nurse gasped. The driver shouted. Pedestrians began to gather. She backed away, clutching Henry to her chest, whispering his name over and over as his cries weakened and then calmed. His head burrowed against her, breath shaking, heart pounding. A constable approached. "Madam, is this your child?" "No," she said, "but I am the only mother he knows." The officer hesitated. Another voice entered the fray. "She stole the child," came the hiss. Edward Harrow stepped forward from the crowd, his coat immaculate, his voice cold. "This woman has interfered with official medical transport. I demand her detainment." People stared. A maid, a child, a nobleman, a scandal waiting to ignite. The constable looked between them. "Is this a matter for the court, sir?" "It is," Edward said. "And for the press, I imagine." A carriage was summoned. Willow did not resist. Henry had fallen asleep again, his small body exhausted. She held him as long as she could until they took him from her arms. They led her away through the square, eyes upon her like knives, and the headlines wrote themselves. "Maid abducts Duke's infant son." In daylight, Dash is the heir in danger. Questions swirl around mysterious Nurse Duke remains silent as scandal grows back at Harrow House. The Dowager Duchess sat at her writing desk when the first report arrived. A sealed note, brief and brutal in its economy of words. She read it once, then again. Then she rose, slowly, with the grace of a woman accustomed to surviving storms, not by bracing, but by stepping directly into the eye. She found Edward in the drawing room, sipping his midday cordial as if he had not just detonated a household. "You've gone too far," she said without preamble. He turned, startled, but only for a moment. Then the smile returned. "I've acted in the child's interest," he said smoothly, "and in the name of propriety." "You wouldn't recognize propriety if it was stitched into your waistcoat," she snapped. He raised an eyebrow. "Are you defending her now? Publicly?" "I am," the Dowager said. "And if your actions result in one more line of slander against my grandson's name, you will find yourself very publicly disowned." Edward's smile faltered. "The child was in distress," she continued, "and you used it as leverage. This house will not bear the weight of your ambition." "I did what Alistair was too weak to do." "No," Eleanor Harrow said. "You did what only a coward would do. You struck at a woman without power because you feared the strength she carried." Edward opened his mouth, but she raised her hand. "I will handle the rest." She left him standing amid the silence of his own unraveling. Across the city, in the office of a barrister connected to the exhibition committee, Lady Eugenia Greystoke stood quietly beside a desk. Her gloved hands rested on a folded newspaper. She had seen the image: Willow in the street, the child in her arms. She had felt the gut-wrenching twist that came with knowing how such a sight would be interpreted, how cruelly the world punished women without shields. "See that she is released," she said. The barrister blinked. "Lady Eugenia, that would—" "Anonymously," she added. He nodded. Willow was released that evening, into the quiet hands of the Dowager's own carriage. She returned to Harrow House not in triumph, but in silence. When she stepped into the nursery, Henry lifted his head. She reached for him, and this time, no one stopped her. The morning after the scandal had nearly shattered, Harrow House began not with silence, but with the sound of firm footsteps crossing marble, papers rustling under gloved hands, and the deep toll of consequence echoing from room to room. For the first time in many months, the Duke of Harrow had summoned the entire household to the great salon. The staff lined the perimeter of the room, heads slightly bowed, unsure of what was to come. Servants did not gather like this unless something monumental was at stake, and they could feel it in the walls, in the air, in the very stillness of the portraits hanging from the high ceilings. Something had changed. At the far end of the room, Alistair stood by the hearth, tall and composed, the fire behind him casting long shadows that seemed to deepen the angle of his jaw, the quiet steel in his eyes. He did not look like a man shaken by gossip, nor like one gripped by scandal. He looked like a man who had made a choice and was about to face the cost of it. Willow stood apart, her hands clasped before her, chin lifted despite the pounding in her chest. She wore her usual plain grey dress and apron, but her presence was undeniable. Anchored, steady. She no longer tried to shrink herself. The world had already tried to erase her once. She would not offer it a second chance. At the Duke's side stood the Dowager Duchess, a fortress of black silk and unwavering gaze. Beside her, in an unexpected gesture of solidarity, Lady Eugenia Greystoke stood composed, her expression unreadable, but her posture unmistakably deliberate. The room quieted. "I have called you here today," Alistair began, his voice resonant, "not to address a rumor, but to dismantle a lie." He let the words settle, watching them ripple across the room. "A lie designed to weaken my household, to endanger my son, and to destroy the character of the woman who has done more for this family than many bearing our name." A murmur stirred among the footmen, quickly hushed. Alistair stepped forward. "The events of the past days have not been the result of confusion or misjudgment. They have been orchestrated by deceit, rooted in the ambition of my cousin, Edward Harrow, who bribed a disgraced nursemaid to fabricate a tale of seduction and impropriety." Gasps were heard, faint but genuine. Eyes turned toward the space Edward had once occupied, now empty. "The physician who supported these lies," Alistair continued, "has been discredited. His license revoked. He will never practice again under the royal banner." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice softened. I regret that it has taken me so long to act openly, but I speak now with full knowledge, with clarity, and with no shame." He turned then, truly turned, and looked at Willow. "She has done what none of us could. She gave peace to my son. She gave peace to this house, and I will not allow her name to be tarnished by those who fear what they cannot own." A hush deeper than silence settled. Then, unexpectedly, it was Lady Eugenia who stepped forward. "I too," she said, her voice smooth but resolute, "was approached by Edward Harrow. He offered me the chance to join his concerns. I declined, but I remained silent, believing discretion to be the nobler choice. I was wrong." She looked at Willow. "I speak now because truth is not only owed to nobility, it is owed to the noble-hearted." The dowager's eyes glinted, just faintly, with approval. And then it was done. No applause followed, no fanfare, but something irrevocable shifted in the room. When the gathering dispersed, Willow found herself drawn toward the garden path behind the east wing. The sky above was soft with the promise of rain, and the air smelled of lilac and earth. She needed space to breathe, to understand what had just passed. She heard him before she saw him. Alistair walked quietly behind her, his footsteps deliberate, yet hesitant. When she stopped beneath the weeping willow near the pond, he did too. "You defended me," she said, her voice low. "I should have done so sooner." She turned to face him. He looked at her not with pity or desire, but with reverence. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small box, not ornate but simple and elegant. He opened it to reveal a ring, gold, with a single, uncut sapphire. "My mother's," he said. "She gave it to me years ago, with no instruction except this: give it to someone who brings light into dark rooms." Willow's breath caught. "I want you to be my wife," he said, "not because you saved my son or this house or even me, but because you taught me to see what I had blinded myself to." Adrushi looked at the ring, then at him. Her answer came softly but without hesitation. "No." He froze. She stepped closer, her gaze steady. "I do love you," she said, "but I will not be chosen as a means to restore your honor. I will not be claimed because it soothes a scandal or because it silences a crowd." He tried to speak, but she raised a hand. "I must belong to myself first," she continued, "before I can belong to anyone else. I will not be saved, and I will not be reshaped." The words did not hurt him. They humbled him. He lowered his head. "I would never ask you to be less than who you are." "Then let me become more," she said, "on my own terms." A voice interrupted them from behind. "I always believed strength to be a virtue more suited to men." They turned to find the Dowager Duchess approaching, her gloved hands clasped before her, her eyes unflinching. "But I see now," she added, "that strength in a woman is what holds the house together." She looked at Willow, and her voice softened with rare emotion. "Strength does not disqualify you from being chosen. It qualifies you to choose." Willow's eyes misted. She bowed her head, not in submission, but in gratitude. That evening, as the lamps were lit and the hearths rekindled, Edward Harrow made his final attempt to salvage the ruin he had wrought. He met Eugenia in the drawing room of her father's townhouse, smug and too certain of his own charm. "You have power," he said. "Use it. For both of us. For what's right." But Eugenia did not rise to his bait. Instead, she turned to the open doorway behind her, where a reporter waited, notepad in hand. "I've already used it," she said coldly, "and I've decided what's right is to see you undone." The scandal broke the next morning, but for once it wasn't Willow's name in the headlines, it was Edward's, and Harrow House exhaled. The wind that morning carried no chill. It brushed gently through the tall oaks that guarded Harrow House, rustling through ivy and flowering branches, stirring the curtains of rooms that had, until recently, forgotten how to breathe. There was no announcement posted in the town square, no grand invitation delivered in gilt-edged envelopes, and yet within those ancient walls something was taking place, quietly, reverently, without permission from society or blessing from tradition. A wedding. Not the kind with trumpets and pearls, but one woven from the soft threads of defiance and grace. Willow stood before the tall mirror in the East Wing guest chamber, no longer the maid's quarters, and yet not the master's rooms either. It was a space between, a space she had claimed. Her reflection looked back with calm eyes, framed by dark lashes and soft chestnut hair coiled in a simple twist at the nape of her neck. Her gown was not white. It was a soft, misty grey, the colour of London mornings, stitched from plain muslin, fitted modestly to her form, the sleeves long and the hem grazing the floor. A faded ribbon in muted lilac encircled her waist, a gesture from the seamstress who had once taken her in when the world had cast her out. The woman had sewn it by hand, her fingers trembling, her eyes moist when she whispered, "You're not just surviving anymore, you're choosing." Willow's hands smoothed the fabric slowly. Her breath came evenly. There was no veil, no crown of flowers, only honesty and the sound of her heart, steady now, not hiding. Henry cooed in the cradle behind her, full and content, his little fists waving in the air as if he too understood that something sacred was about to unfold. The dowager entered without knocking. She stood in the doorway, cloaked as always in black, though today she wore a brooch at her throat, amethyst and pearl. Her eyes, sharp and dry, rested on Willow with a gaze that had once sliced but now seemed to cradle. Willow turned. She said nothing, merely awaited whatever judgment might come. Instead, the dowager stepped forward and held out a small velvet box. She opened it with elegant fingers, revealing a simple ring, gold, worn smooth with time and set with a pale sapphire, uncut and imperfect. "This belonged to my daughter-in-law," she said. She wore it with grace, though her heart was often heavy. "It belongs now to a woman who changed a house, not just a name." Willow hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I am many things," the dowager replied, placing the ring in Willow's palm, "but never uncertain." They held each other's gaze for a moment longer, and then the dowager nodded once and departed. The chapel at Harrow House was old, built of stone, with high arched windows stained in sapphire and smoke. It had seen baptisms, funerals, whispered prayers, and silent tears. Today, it bore witness to something rarer, the union of two souls, forged not in convenience or arrangement, but in fire, in trials, in quiet rebellion. Alistair stood near the altar, his back straight, his face unreadable to anyone who did not know how to look for the softness beneath the steel. His coat was dark, tailored to his form, but unadorned. No medals, no cravat. He wore only a white linen shirt beneath, pressed and modest, and a small sprig of lavender tucked into his lapel. When the chapel doors opened, he turned, and everything else vanished. Willow entered with Henry in her arms. There were no petals on the aisle, no chorus singing, no sea of watching faces, only the rustle of her skirt, the soft babble of the child in her embrace, and the thunderous sound of Alistair's heart breaking open in his chest. She walked alone, and yet not alone. Every step she took belonged to the woman who had buried a child beneath a willow tree, to the girl who had been dismissed without name, to the mother who had nursed another woman's son through the dark. When she reached him, Alistair reached out, not to take her hand, but to steady her fingers as she passed Henry to the dowager, who held the child in the front pew with the reverence of one cradling the future. The vows were spoken in low, trembling voices, not because of fear, but because of the weight of what they meant. Alistair's voice cracked once, when he promised not to protect her, but to stand beside her, even when the world refused to do the same. Willow did not promise obedience or silence. She promised truth. She promised presence. The ring fit her finger as if it had always waited for her. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, no bells rang, no choir burst into song. Only Henry giggled once, as if he too understood the absurdity and joy of witnessing something that was never meant to be, but now was. Later, as the sun slipped behind the garden walls, Eugenia arrived in the library. She had not attended the ceremony. She had sent flowers, simple lilies, white and fragrant with no note. Now she stood before Willow in the quiet, holding a folded document. "This is a deed," she said. "A property in Lambeth, former boarding house, now a shelter, for women who've lost their names." Willow looked down at the paper. Her fingers trembled. "I've placed it in your name," Eugenia said. Her tone clipped, her gaze careful. "Do with it what you will." Willow met her eyes. "Why?" Eugenia hesitated. Her fan tapped once against her gloved palm. "Because once," she said, "I believed power belonged to those who inherited it. Now, I believe it belongs to those who survive it." Willow nodded, and the two women, so different, so alike, stood in a silence deeper than forgiveness. That evening, Edward Harrow boarded a ship bound for Barbados. He did not go willingly. The charges against him had not been pressed formally, yet. But the threat lingered in every handshake refused, every door closed. His exile had been negotiated by the Duke himself, with the Dowager's icy blessing and Eugenia's silent signature on an affidavit. He left with a trunk, 2 servants, and the bitter taste of defeat. No one saw him off. Back at Harrow House, the chapel remained open. Candles flickered in the windows. And in the nursery, Henry slept in a cradle made softer by the presence of a woman who had once believed her motherhood ended beneath a tree. Alistair stood at the doorway, watching Willow rock the child slowly, her hand brushing his brow, her lips whispering stories not yet written. He said nothing. He simply crossed the room, knelt beside her, and rested his head on her lap. And in that moment, the Duchess of Harrow was born, not from title, but from choice. The autumn sun settled over London like a soft farewell. Its golden light filtered through the lace curtains of Harrow House, casting long, warm shadows across the wood-panelled rooms that had once stood in mourning. Now they pulsed with life, gentler, quieter perhaps, but unmistakably alive. It had been several months since the chapel wedding, and in that time the world had shifted. Sometimes slowly, like ivy creeping up old stone, and sometimes like a tremor beneath one's feet. The great halls echoed less with sorrow and more with voices, some high and giggling, others soft and learned, many feminine. The past had not been erased, but it had been repainted with warmer tones. Willow stood in the schoolroom she had opened on the southern side of the estate, once used for storing linens, now filled with benches, slates, and the quiet scratch of chalk. The walls bore maps and alphabet charts. A small hearth crackled in the corner. A dozen young girls, most no older than 10, leaned eagerly over their lessons, their hair in braids, their hands smudged with ink. She moved among them, not as a duchess, but as a guide, pausing to correct a letter here, to offer praise there. Her gown was simple, navy wool, high-necked and trimmed in ivory. A small silver brooch rested above her heart, shaped like a willow tree. It had been a gift from Eugenia. Behind her, the door creaked open. She turned, half expecting a maid or a footman, but it was Alistair. He stood there in his work coat, no cravat, his hands still slightly stained with ink from estate ledgers. His hair, touched by the sun, curled faintly at his temple. He looked not like a duke, but like a man who had made peace with his name and begun to use it for something good. "The girls have finished the first set of readers," Willow said with quiet pride. "We may need to order more." "Then we'll order more," he replied, stepping inside. "And another table, perhaps. I believe we have 3 more joining next week. They'll need uniforms and boots and—" He reached for her hand. "And they shall have all of it." She smiled, soft and steady, her fingers closing around his. Outside, the trees blushed copper and ochre. In the gardens, tenants came and went with ease, not glancing over their shoulders. The new steward, appointed by Alistair, had redrawn contracts to favour tenant farmers, not punish them. Wages were fair, debts forgiven, widows supported. And once a week, a nurse rode out with baskets of supplies to check on expectant mothers. The house that had once been built to guard itself now opened its arms. That evening, beneath a soft grey sky, the family dressed for the closing ceremony of the great exhibition. Willow stood before the long mirror once more, adjusting her bonnet. Her dress, pale lilac with white cuffs, was cut in a style that flattered her without drawing too much attention. She wore no jewels except her wedding ring. Henry, now over a year old and full of mischief, clutched the brim of his tiny hat and tossed it to the floor. "I think he's made his opinion on formal attire quite clear," Alistair said, lifting the boy with ease. "He looks like his father," Willow murmured, pressing a kiss to the child's temple. "He has your tenacity," Alistair answered, eyes warm. "He'll rule his own world someday." They arrived at the Crystal Palace just as the lamps were being lit. The massive structure of iron and glass stood proud as a cathedral to progress. Inside, the air buzzed with voices, music, and the lingering scent of autumn roses. Dignitaries milled about, adorned in silks and satins, feathers trembling with every nod. But it was not the gowns or the jewels that drew attention. It was the woman walking beside the Duke of Harrow, not on his arm, but hand in hand. Willow walked with her head high, her expression composed. Henry toddled between them, his little boots tapping against the marbled floor, one hand in each of theirs. Some turned to stare, others whispered. One noblewoman gasped audibly as they passed, her lips curled in scandalous disbelief. Willow felt the weight of it. Every glance, every judgment, every muttered name she no longer answered to. But she did not flinch. She simply lifted her chin, gaze fixed ahead. And then Henry stopped. His grip tightened. He turned to face the staring woman, his expression fierce in the innocent way of toddlers. He reached up toward Willow and said with complete certainty, "Mama." The word fell like a bell struck in the quiet heart of a church. The noblewoman faltered. Her mouth opened, then closed. Willow bent to lift her son, cradling him gently. She did not speak. She didn't need to. Alistair placed his hand on her back, his touch light but grounding. Together, they continued down the long gallery, past whispers, past judgment, past the weight of centuries. Later that night, as lanterns flickered above the Thames and music played from distant carriages, they stood at the edge of the palace's garden, looking out over the city. Willow held Henry close, his breathing slow against her shoulder. Alistair's voice was low when he spoke. "I once believed there were rules that could not be broken. And now?" she asked, turning slightly. "Now I know," he said, his eyes meeting hers with solemn affection, "that love rewrites them." She reached for his hand. And in the hush between night and dawn, as London exhaled the last sigh of its summer splendor, the world held its breath. They had defied it all, not with noise, but with constancy, with truth, with love. They rewrote the rules, one child, one vow, one daring kiss at a time. 3 years had passed. The seasons had come and gone over Harrow House like soft brushstrokes on a fading canvas. Spring flowers blooming earlier now, summers warmer, the air around the estate filled with the scent of new beginnings. The once imposing structure had not changed in stone or mortar, but in spirit. What had once been a house heavy with sorrow and silence was now a home. And on this particular spring morning, it was alive with laughter, children's laughter. The soft patter of feet echoed down the corridor, followed by the shriek of joy only 2 toddlers could create when escaping the watchful eyes of a governess. Henry, now 4, led the charge. His curls bouncing, his cheeks flushed, eyes as sharp and mischievous as ever. Beside him toddled a younger boy with chestnut-brown hair and his mother's thoughtful eyes. His name was Elias, born under winter snow and named for strength. Their laughter rang down the hallway and into the parlor, where Willow sat with an embroidery hoop in her lap, her fingers pausing as she looked up and smiled. "Henry Harrow," she called out, not raising her voice. "I can hear you stealing biscuits again." A giggle echoed in reply, then the slam of the nursery door. Willow shook her head fondly and returned to her stitching. Her hands moved with calm precision, even as her heart tugged toward the sound of her son's. Nearby, a cradle lay empty. The newest member of the family, a girl named Beatrice, slept peacefully in a basket near the hearth. Her tiny breaths were the soft rhythm of this new chapter. Behind Willow, the library doors opened. Alistair entered, no longer the man of shadows and burdens he had once been. Age had not marked him much, but love had softened him. His eyes smiled more easily. His shoulders no longer bore the weight of guilt alone. He crossed the room without words, kissed the crown of Willow's head, and then settled beside her, his hand reaching instinctively for hers. "How is she?" he asked, nodding toward the cradle. "Perfect," Willow murmured, "and thoroughly unaware of the kingdom she's inherited, blankets, brothers, and all. She'll rule it anyway," he replied, "like her mother." They sat in silence for a moment, content. Outside, the school for servant girls had doubled in size. Eugenia's endowment had grown into a foundation that funded literacy programs across 3 counties. Mothers, who had once hidden in shame, now walked with their children to class, heads held high, hands no longer trembling. Eugenia herself had married. Not a duke, not a baron, but an antiquarian with a quiet laugh and a love for her sharp tongue. They lived in Bath now, and she wrote letters every month, letters filled with droll commentary, clippings from newspapers, and carefully wrapped gifts for the children. The Dowager had passed on peacefully one autumn morning, with Henry at her side and Willow holding her hand. In her final letter, left sealed in her writing desk, she wrote, "To change a house is no small feat, but to change a legacy, that is the work of a woman with courage in her blood." Edward was never heard from again. The ship had taken him to Barbados, but the consequences of his actions had followed him farther still. Whispers reached London from time to time, of debts, of illness, of a man undone not by others, but by himself. Willow never spoke of him, neither did Alistair. Some things were best left in the shadows behind them. In the city, whispers still existed, they always would, but they were no longer venomous. They had lost their bite. The sight of the Duke of Harrow carrying his daughter through the muddy lanes of a village school no longer shocked, only intrigued. Time had not erased the scandal. It had simply grown tired of it. Love had outlasted the noise. That evening, after the children were tucked into bed, after the fires were stoked and the hallways quieted, Willow and Alistair stood on the balcony of their room. Below, the gardens stretched in peace. Above, stars blinked against the velvet sky. She leaned into him, her head on his shoulder. "I never thought it would feel this way," she whispered. "What way?" "Ordinary, and yet extraordinary." He kissed her temple. "That's because we made it so." She turned to face him, brushing a hand against his cheek. "I was once a maid in this house," she said softly, "and now I'm its heart." He smiled. "No, you always were. I was just too blind to see it." Their hands found each other in the quiet, fingers lacing like the roots of trees, long grown together. And as the night settled around them, warm and full and still, they understood something neither of them could have known before. It had never been about breaking rules. It had always been about rewriting them, together, in ink made of struggle, in vows born of choice, in the embrace of children who would never know shame, and in the soft, fierce love of a woman who dared to stay. Some stories don't shout, they whisper. They bloom quietly in the shadows of old houses, in the hearts of women told to stay silent, in the choices no one sees, but that change everything. Willow's journey reminds us that love is not always loud. Sometimes it's holding your ground when the world tells you to move. It's choosing dignity when shame was the easier path. It's rewriting the rules not with anger, but with grace, courage, and a steady heart. She began as a maid with a hidden wound. She became a duchess who healed more than herself. And Alistair, he broke free from the chains of duty to follow the pull of something stronger than tradition, truth. Together, they didn't just fall in love. They rose with it. They created a home where legacy meant compassion, where motherhood was not judged by bloodlines, where silence gave way to laughter. If this story stirred something in you, if you felt the ache, the hope, the fire beneath every glance and vow, tell us. We'd love to know what this tale meant to you. And if you made it all the way to this final moment, write "Reborn" in the comments, so we know you walked every step of this journey with us. Your words help others find their way to these stories too. If you'd like to support the team behind these heartfelt narratives, you can send us super thanks in any amount that feels right for you. Every gesture helps us keep telling stories that deserve to be heard. And if that's not possible right now, your share means just as much. Send this story to a friend who loves period romances, or to someone who needs a reminder that second chances can bloom in the most unlikely places. And don't miss the other love stories I've left for you in the video cards, each one waiting to be discovered, just like Willow was. Thank you for being part of this, for feeling deeply, for believing that love, when true, doesn't ask permission. It simply remakes the world.